Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is a great evening that we have in store for you. This is Left Bank Books welcomes career advisor and host of the Punk Rock HR podcast, Laurie Ruettimann, who will discuss her new book, Betting on You: How to Put Yourself First and Finally Take Control of Your Career. Ruettimann will be in conversation with author and career expert, Lindsey Pollak. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore, celebrating 51 years this year. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Laurie and Lindsey, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. It has been almost a year of doing virtual events. We have adapted and are still bringing you the things that you love the most about Left Bank Books, with curbside pickup and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. We are incredibly happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. We hope that you enjoyed this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a copy for you or for all of your friends at left-bank.com. Purchasing a copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff here and operating. We thank you for your support. We need your support. Plus, you get an extra fantastic thing of having a wonderful book to read and chat with your friends about. I am Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from the audience at the end of the event, so please type your questions as a comment. You can do that at any point throughout the event. And be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. We have so many incredible events already lined up for this year, and we are adding events daily. I think I added 2 events just today. About tonight's book, Betting on You. Daniel H. Pink, the #1 New York Times bestselling author of When, says, indispensable reading for anyone seeking to improve their professional selves. An essential guide for how to snap out of autopilot and become your own best advocate, with candid anecdotes and easy-to-adopt steps from veteran HR specialist and popular podcast host Laurie Ruettimann. Chances are you've spent the last few months cooped up inside, buried under a relentless news cycle and work that never seems to switch off. Millions of us worldwide are overworked, exhausted, and trying our hardest, yet not getting the recognition we deserve. It's time for a fix. Top career coach and HR consultant Laurie Ruettimann knows firsthand that work can get a hell of a lot better. A decade ago, Ruettimann was uninspired, blaming others and herself for the unhappiness she felt, until she had an epiphany. If she wanted a fulfilling existence, she couldn't sit around and wait for change. She had to be her own leader. She had to truly take a hold of life, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly, in order to transform her future. Today, as businesses prioritize their bottom line over employee satisfaction and workers become increasingly isolated, the need to safeguard your well-being is crucial. And though this sounds intimidating, it's easier to do than you think. Through tactical advice on how to approach work in a smart and healthy manner, which includes knowing when to sign off for the day, doubling down on our capacity to learn, fixing those finances, and beating imposter syndrome once and for all, Ruettimann lays out the framework necessary to champion your interests and create a life you actually enjoy. Packed with advice and stories of others who regained control of their lives, Betting on You is a game-changing must-read for how to radically improve your day-to-day, working more effectively and enthusiastically starting now. And about tonight's speakers. Laurie Ruettimann is a former human resources leader turned writer, entrepreneur, and speaker. CNN recognized her as one of the top 5 career advisors in the United States, and her work has been featured on NPR, The New Yorker, USA Today, The Wall Street Journal, and Vox. She frequently delivers keynote speeches at business and management events around the world and hosts the popular podcast Punk Rock HR. She lives with her husband and cats in Raleigh, North Carolina. And tonight, we are so happy to have Lindsey Pollak. Lindsey is a New York Times bestselling author and one of the world's leading career and workplace experts. Lindsey was named to the 2020 Thinkers 50 Radar list, which honors the top global management thinkers whose work is shaping the future of how organizations are managed and led. Her advice and opinions have appeared in such media outlets as The Today Show, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, CNN, and NPR. Her book, The Remix, How to Lead and Succeed in the Multi-Generational Workplace, was named a Book of the Month by both The Wall Street Journal and The Financial Times. She is also the author of 2 career advice books for young professionals, Becoming the Boss, New Rules for the Next Generation of Leaders, and Getting from College to Career, Your Essential Guide to Succeeding in the Real World. Her next book, which we are very excited about, is a response to the COVID crisis, Recalculating, Navigate Your Career Through the Changing World of Work. And that will be published by HarperCollins on March 23rd, 2021. So not long from now. And I will put the link for how to purchase that book as well in the comments. But now I am so incredibly happy to welcome for the evening our guests, Laurie Ruettimann and Lindsey Pollak for Left Bank Books. If everyone at home would please help me in giving them a giant round of applause. Hello.
Hi, team. How's it going?
Hi, great. Happy to have you here.
Thanks. Lindsey, you ready to do this?
I'm ready to do this. Shane, thank you for that awesome introduction. This is so exciting. I'm super honored to be here. And thank you, Left Bank Books. Please support your local bookstores and buy books from Left Bank Books. Shane, thank you so much. Laurie, this book is amazing. I have Post-it notes. I have notes. I have so much I want to talk about. But the first question that I want to ask is the question that I think everybody has to answer, which is, why did you write this book? You have a great career, you have a podcast, you wanted to put it all into a book. So can you just tell us the story of how Betting on You came about?
Sure. I decided to write Betting on You because for years I preached advice around workplace careers. I preached the advice of telling people to put themselves first, to prioritize their well-being, to be self-leaders, and to lean heavily into risk management and take risks with themselves. And then I realized I hadn't done it with myself. The one way I have been identifying out there publicly for over a decade is as a writer, and I hadn't written a real big girl book. And so it was time to put my pants on and sit down and write this book, and I did just that. And boy, it's been a real adventure. I've learned so much. I've grown so much from this experience. And I have to say, I was a little intimidated writing in the career space because I'm standing on the shoulders of so many greats, but it's a really welcoming community. And Lindsey, I'm really glad you're here tonight. So thank you.
I am so glad to be here. And I think that's such a good point to start with. Remember, my mother-in-law once said, "You're always blogging and writing about other people's books. Aren't they competitors?" And I just said, no, there's plenty of unhappy workers out there that we all have a space to work in. And you are obviously one of my favorite people in the space. The book is so good. And there are a lot of career and workplace experts. If you're watching this book event, you probably read this kind of book. And what I think is so different about you, what I know is so different, is you have a background as being HR famous, as we call it. You were in HR. And the way I describe this book is that it is like having an HR person at your company who also just happens to be your best friend. So will tell you the truth of what is really going on. You have an extensive HR background. And so I want you to just frame for us the way you do it in the book so well, which is the way a company sort of treats its business is the way we as individuals need to treat it, as in paying ourselves and thinking about ourselves first. So can you just give that framing of how you take your corporate experience and apply it to individuals? I think it's such a great setup for the rest of the book.
Thank you. You know, for years, I worked at a small company called Pfizer. Nobody's ever heard of them, right? They're not in the news or anything. So Pfizer, whatever was happening in the marketplace, always had money for tomorrow. And when I was there, the organization had about 100,000 employees, and they wanted to narrow that down to about 50,000. And so it was my job to go out into the market and deliver bad news. And I'm perfectly designed for it. I'm 5 feet tall. I'm bubbly and blonde. I can tell people their lives were over. And they're like, "Aren't you cute? Yes, let's go get some coffee." So I was designed for this job, and it was wearing on me. But no matter whose lives I ruined, Pfizer was okay. The corporation existed tomorrow. And I really started to see that if I wanted a life with integrity, if I wanted to go after the things I wanted to achieve in this world, I had to run my own life like I was the CEO. I had to put myself first. I had to make sure that whatever I did today set me up for success tomorrow, whether that's my well-being, my physical, emotional, and financial well-being, or my ability to take risks, or even my aptitude for learning. I needed to learn new things to set myself up for tomorrow. So really following that model of viability from corporate America, I thought, got to run my life like a business. Let's see where this goes, because God knows it couldn't have been any worse than what I was doing day to day.
I love your honesty. And I actually want to go back in your story a little bit before Pfizer, which is my favorite story in the book. You talk about how everyone has been fired in some way, shape, or form at some point in time. And you told this absolutely phenomenal story. And again, what's so great about the book is your honesty and combined with your HR experience. You talk about an incident where there might have been ketchup involved. So can you just quickly tell us, so we know that you're not just a suit from Pfizer who laid people off, but you have also had jobs in the real world. Can you talk about that experience?
Sure. Well, before I begin the story, I want to say that I have a dear friend by the name of Jennifer McClure, who is a management consultant. And she once told me that everybody good gets fired once. And I thought, is that true? And I think it might be true, because I indeed was fired from one of my very early jobs. I was a teenager and went to work at a German restaurant in Chicago and applied for the job of busboy, and automatically I'm not qualified. I'm not a boy, but they said, come on, we'll train you anyway. And I went in and worked all day, bussing tables and cleaning up schnitzel. And at the end of the shift, the owner of the restaurant said, you know what, kid, you're leaning, you don't have enough to do. Why don't you pick up every ketchup bottle and bring them back into the back room? And I thought, great, no problem. So I grabbed a big tray and I put 37 ketchup bottles on this big tray. And I mean, I'm not sure I was even 5 feet tall then. I picked up this tray and bounced it one way, bounced it other way, and the glass went everywhere. I was covered in ketchup from head to toe. Looked like a German horror film. And the owner of the restaurant said to me, kid, that is the stupidest thing I've ever seen anybody do. Get the hell out of here. So I ran to the bathroom, cleaned up, and left. And a waiter chased me down as I was walking out. He said, kid, that was the funniest thing I've ever seen. Here's your share of the tips. And it was $200. I got fired and still made $200. So when Jennifer McClure gave me that advice and said, everybody good gets fired once, I felt like, okay, I'm in good company here. And Lindsey, by the way, she's right. If you don't fit in, if you see things differently, if you experiment and you try something new, you're bound to screw it up, right? I mean, tell me, you're in this team as well. Have you been fired from something?
I was laid off, so I was fired along with everybody.
Okay.
And my story is a little bit different, actually, which kind of goes into the next question I want to ask you. I was laid off from my dream job. Which was one of the most devastating things. The company went bankrupt. It was part of the dot-com bust in the year 2000. And it was not the plan. I had found the job. I had figured things out, and it exploded. The company went bankrupt. And lo and behold, the CEO gave me my laptop, which I'm sure was illegal, and said, go start your own business. You know, you've got it in you. And I did. So all's well that ends well 20 years later. But it was a devastating experience. And one of the things that you talk about is, you know, you can't just live for your job, because either you get fired from a job you hate or you get fired from a job you like. And I think one of the things we find ourselves in 2020, 2021 is people are not where they meant to be, right? Yeah. Or where they thought they were meant to be. And you start with this concept, which I just underlined every time you said it, which is we can't really fix work. Fix yourself first, whether you are happy or unhappy, laid off or not. Can you talk about that concept of fixing yourself first? It's so powerful.
Thank you. You know, one of the things that I've learned in my own story, in the stories of others as a coach, is that we identify our worth with our work. And that is a fundamentally toxic connection to make. If you identify your worth with your work, that means you identify with something you don't control. And so the way we get ourselves out of a toxic environment, the way we manage through this all is to fix it. And again, I'm using air quotes, right? Is anything really fixable? But to fix it by fixing ourselves, by peeling back from work, demonstrating something in the book I call professional detachment, looking at our work as if it's our client, and taking that extra energy and focusing it back on ourselves. What is it about our lives that we need to address, to correct, to revisit, to forgive? All of those questions In that work, you're going to be an elevated human being, and you're going to bring that good energy, that good stuff that you've learned about yourself to your job, and maybe even have a healthier relationship with that job in and of itself.
You talk about how to fix your career in 30 days, right? Some of the things that you can do if you're unhappy right now, as some people might find themselves. And the two that I want you to talk about are the importance of learning and also finding community. And you said something here that I wanted to quote. You said, when you're curious, you're on fire. So can you talk a little bit about kind of following your curiosity for anybody who's watching and is unhappy now? I just thought that was beautiful. When you're curious, you're on fire.
Well, it's not just my point of view that learning helps you become happier and more fulfilled in this world. This is backed by research and science. Harvard Business Review, Stanford, University of Michigan, they've all published these amazing studies that show a correlation and a connection between employees who are learning and employees who are happy. But I say don't stop there, because if you're not learning, you're not growing. And if you're not growing, you're not thriving. And what's the point of this if you're not thriving? So for me, I truly believe that all learning is worthwhile. So we go to work and we put these blinders on and we focus on learning for the job we're doing today and maybe the job we're going to do in 18 months. But who we are today is just a snapshot in time. I would love for people to use whatever limited time they have in the world to answer some unanswered questions in their lives. You know, I work with a client right now, an executive, and he is smoking bacon and curing ham. That's his passion. That's fine. But what he's doing is he's learning a different way to learn. He's taking all of that information that he's getting from his community, processing it in a new way, and bringing that to his job. So I just think all learning is worthwhile. And again, if you're learning, you're growing, and that is the key to happiness. So that's point number one, Lindsey. But I want to stop right there, because do you find that you're happier when you're learning?
Absolutely. And I want to point out that it doesn't have to be about your job. I love that. Because if you learn how to do something new, it's beginner's mind, right? If I put myself in a situation where I'm trying something new or learning something new, I read a lot, which is why I love bookstores so much. And I'll try to read something that just would never occur to me, right? It's exposure. It's thinking about something different. You can go on YouTube and watch a video I think that's why people like TikTok so much, right? You're learning all these, ridiculous things about how to tie-dye t-shirts or something. So yeah, I think whenever you're learning, you're growing, you're thinking, it shows you that there are other possibilities. I just think the way you framed it is so beautiful. Even if you're miserable in a job, there's something you can learn.
I also like this idea of learning as part of a broader community, whether it's the University of YouTube or learning in Zoom classes. How many of us have done crazy Zoom things during this COVID period, whether it's a Zoom event with a mixologist or learning something new about quilting. I mean, many of us have jumped online and learned in a group or in a community. And so your point around community is really interesting, and how it connects to learning. Because whenever someone is really alone at work, I push them to go find an online community, to find their people, to find people who speak their language, but also to learn, how do you deal with this problem? How do you approach this issue? I have this challenge at work and I would like some advice. Learn from the people who love you and know you. Learn from like-minded spirits. And again, take that experience and bring that good stuff to work. And by the way, teach it to the people around you. I mean, that's the real beauty and the real connection and the opportunity we have in the workplace.
For those who are watching who are job hunting, for my book, Recalculating, I interviewed many, many people who had landed jobs during COVID, right? And said, what did you do? And there was one woman in particular who had an HR background. And she said, sort of counterintuitively, she spent time with other people who were job hunting. People said, what are you doing? You need to spend time with people who have jobs. And she said, no. Everybody is looking for something different. We supported each other. It was camaraderie. It was networking. It was mutual support. And they became a referral network for each other. And she said those relationships were so strong because they were in it together. And I thought, never would have occurred to me that you should network with other job seekers. And it was such a beautiful story in this particular moment in time that is so challenging.
Yeah, really lovely. I love that story. Well, Lindsey, I have to tell you that job searching in and of itself in any environment, COVID, not COVID, is a terribly lonely experience. And I talk a lot about that in this book. Job hunting is something that really challenges and flummoxes so many people. And I love that you've got a positive story about the job hunt. We need that more than ever.
Let's talk about job hunting, because you cover it in the book, and you talk about how to cope with job loss during the pandemic and otherwise. Can you talk about some of your strategies for job hunters?
Mm-hmm. Well, more and more people are pushed online. That's just the way that we live. But when you can, it's so important to make sure that you get off the internet and try to make human-to-human connections. LinkedIn is an excellent tool, and I believe in using LinkedIn to its full capacity. Get the list, get the names, get the people you might be connected to, and then find a way to get them on the phone or even to have physically distanced coffee. That still can happen, but that human-to-human connection, the relationship, is what seals the deal. It's not your perfect resume that's SEO configured. It's not the cover letter that just is so detailed and amazing. It's the fact that somebody likes you, knows you, and trusts you. That's what gets you hired. And that doesn't change just because we're in the middle of a pandemic.
I interviewed Steve Dalton, who's another person in our career community who wrote a book called The 2-Hour Job Search. And he talks about that power of networking. And one of the things he said that was so beautiful, he said, you have got to reach out over and over again, because a lot of people will say no, but the people who say yes will be inordinately helpful. So if you reach out to 10 people and 2 say yes, those 2 will be more valuable than the other 8 combined. And I thought that is so true. One of the stats I came across during the pandemic is that searches on Google for the phrase, "how can I help?" went up exponentially. People want to help each other. And so if you reach out and someone says yes, you're doing them a service in a way, because they want to be helpful to you. I'd love for you to talk about sort of your experiences with networking and how you've seen this play out. Because some people say no, but the ones who say yes will do anything for you. And actually, on that note, talk also about networking. And you kind of flip it, right? Sorry, I have so many things I want to talk about. Talk about how networking is not just about asking for help, but also offering help. So talk about help.
Well, there's so much good stuff in there, Lindsey. And thank you for this amazing conversation, because you're right. I mean, again, we stand on the shoulders of so many great people who have big ideas. I do want to take a step back and talk about connecting with people, because you're right. You're going to reach out and you're never going to hear from people. And I would always advise you to assume benign intent. I love that phrase. It's just the right phrase to have. People are not looking at your LinkedIn inbound inquiry and going, this person's terrible, I'm not going to call them back or respond back. They're looking at it and saying, that's really a shame. I am so swamped myself. So your worth is not tied up in whether or not you hear back from someone about your work. It's just a LinkedIn message. It's just an email. But beyond that, you're absolutely right. I mean, networking, connecting with people, mentoring, it's so weird. It's so narcissistic. And it's the antithesis of what we're trying to do in 2021. We are in an era of kindness and compassion and empathy. And the way you not only land a job, but you just live a good life is to be of service. And so that's something I write about throughout the book. I mean, I'm influenced by a writer by the name of Ryan Paw, who said that the way to land a job, but just to be a good human being, is to be helpful, to contribute. This is how you grow your career, through these moments, these relationships that you develop. So you may be in need and you may be struggling, but your struggle is best conveyed through your generosity. I believe that now more than ever.
I once heard an interview with Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, and he said people use LinkedIn wrong. He said, when most people go to LinkedIn, they say, what am I going to get out of this, right? What do I need? And he said the way he approaches it, and he's known as one of the most generous networkers ever, he said, I approach it by going in and saying, what do the people in my network need? Who can I help today? And I think when you approach with that mindset, even if you're a job seeker, you still have so much to give. So I really like that reframing. And I totally agree with you too. Nobody's ever going to say, how dare you reach out on LinkedIn to network? I mean, that's what the site is for. You're never going to offend anybody by doing that, right?
One of the women I most admire in this world is Susie Welch. I've been following her career for years on CNBC and just through her philanthropy. And I must have reached out to her 4 or 5 times in my career to say, I really admire you. I never heard back, but I still consider her a mentor because I take the good stuff that I see, I throw away the rest, and I learn. And when I was writing the book, I wrote about that. And I thought, I should reach out one more time and let her know she's in my book. That's kind of the nice thing to do. And she said, oh my goodness, I never saw any of your messages, even though we're connected. You know how that goes. You just connect with people. You say yes. She said, send me the book. Not only did she read it, she endorsed it. So I'm here as a living, breathing example that you don't give up. And in fact, if you're looking for work, you should make that list of aspirational mentors, the people that you want to connect with, and give it a shot. Tell them how much you admire them and ask them a question that would be really helpful. You may not hear back from all of them, but you may hear back from someone who blurbs your book.
When I was in college, I wrote a letter to Kate White, who at the time was, and I mean the letter, like wrote a letter in the old days before email. She was editor-in-chief of Cosmopolitan magazine at the time, and I had read her book, which was called Why Good Girls Don't Get Ahead, But Gutsy Girls Do. And I wrote to her saying, I'm a gutsy girl. And I typed it, and she wrote back with handwriting in the margins, and she responded to me and mailed it back. I think 15 years later, we ended up speaking together at one of the national women's conferences. And I said, I have that letter. And I sent it to her, and she's become a mentor and friend to me. So it's just amazing what happens when you make that step to reach out. And I want to talk more about mentoring, Laurie, because I just so agree with it. You say on page 124 of your new book, Betting on You,
that
mentorship.
You can keep doing that. You can keep showing.
Yeah, I'm trying to do my little Oprah moment. Mentorship is the single biggest hack for fixing work. That is a pretty bold statement. So back it up. Why is mentoring the single biggest hack for fixing work?
Well, nobody shows up at a job at any stage in their career knowing anything about the job. It takes you about a year to learn what you're doing. But if you can establish relationships in that first year, boy, you are golden. Doors will open for you. And then you'll have permission in that second year to do so much. And I believe in that first year, it's incumbent upon all workers to find a mentor, to really understand, how do I navigate these tricky situations? How do I gently step in without upsetting the political apple cart here at the office? And how do I know when to hold back? A mentor can help you with that. A mentor can guide you. And if you do it right, you'll have a mentor for about a year, and that mentor will turn into a friend. And I saw this firsthand in a story that I told in the book about a very young woman at the time, a young millennial woman who blew it in her job. She was in a leadership role and absolutely was terrible. She was terrible. And I'll just say she called her boss an ass bag. I don't know why, but of course her colleagues sold her out and they stabbed her in the back, and then HR got involved. But I knew this woman. I knew her well. I knew her to have competence and ability and a work ethic. She made a mistake. So my solution to this was to pair her up with a mentor. And that mentor was an older woman, a boomer, who had seen it all, had worked in the same industry, had had many of the same challenges. And not only did they have a good mentor-mentee relationship, but they became buddies. We saved her job, and the young woman got promoted. So it's a terrific story about the power of mentorship. But thank goodness, and this is part of the challenge, she had an HR person who was willing to step in and intervene. So many people out there have an HR department that would have written her off or put her on a performance improvement plan or ruined her self-esteem at a young age. And I just thought, my goodness, there but for the grace of God go I, because I would never call someone an ass bag, but I may have said worse in my career. So yeah.
From ass bag to promotion. Sorry, Shane, I don't think we're supposed to say ass bag, but yeah, it's out there. It's in the book. You talked about millennials, talked about people at the beginning of their careers, a really big issue, particularly for women. And I'm so concerned about what's happening to women in this environment, leaving the workplace. We're back in the 1980s, et cetera. Imposter syndrome is something you talk about in the book. And I think it's such an important topic. How do you address or beat imposter syndrome? I know you have some really tactical suggestions for that.
Yeah. Well, I used to really feel concerned about imposter syndrome and women in particular until I started talking about imposter syndrome and realized it's such a universal thing. Young men, older men, all of us, we all have these moments of fear and self-doubt. And we wonder, am I good enough? Am I smart enough? Am I stupid? Oh, this is terrible, right? This is a universal feeling unless you're a psychopath. So what I wanted to do is first put that in the book and let people know this is very common. And second of all, if you feel these feelings, you can test them out. You can do a simple exercise called a pre-mortem, where you can say, I'm about to do this really audacious thing. I want to take a risk, or I just want to speak up at a meeting. How is this going to fail? And you set a timer for a minute and you write down all the silly, irreverent, goofy, accurate ways that your risk is going to fail. I'm an idiot. I'll say something stupid. And when the timer goes up, you look at that list and you fix it, you address it before you do the thing you want to do. So if you're going to interview and you're worried, I'm not qualified, I can't tell a good story, I sweat too much, I don't make good eye contact, in your list, when you see this, you can work on these things before you interview. And if you do this, research and science has shown you give yourself a 30% greater chance of success. So if you feel like an imposter, test it out. And if it's true, because some of us are imposters, work on it. Just work on fixing it. And know this, it is really a universal feeling, and nobody ever, ever, ever does anything in this world and gets it at 100%. When you take a job, you're maybe 60% qualified for it, and that's generous. And the real beauty is that you're being hired for your potential, your opportunities. So I think there's something really, reassuring to know that nobody expects you to show up on day one performing at 100%, because nobody else ever has in the history of mankind.
So I think one of the areas where so many people have imposter syndrome or feel very nervous about a job interview is the salary negotiation. And I would be remiss talking to somebody with so much HR experience and not getting your advice on how to do this well.
Yeah.
What are your tips for negotiating salary? One of the things I always talk about is exactly what you said, which is think about what are the arguments against it? How are you going to argue for what you want? And I want to share 2 mistakes that I made asking for salary in my first job that I was laid off from in my own firing experience. Number 1, I was told you should give a range. So I made the very mistaken assumption that if I gave a range, they would give me the middle, which of course they give you the bottom of the range. I thought if I wanted 40 and I said 35 to 45, and they give you 34. So that was number 1. And number 2, I had never said the number out loud. And so when I actually was in the room, I'm pretty sure my voice cracked and I sounded absurd actually saying the number because I had never actually articulated the words. So those were 2 mistakes that I personally made in negotiating salary. What advice would you give to young me or other people who are in that situation? And a big question I'm seeing out there, can you possibly negotiate a raise during a pandemic?
All great questions. So first of all, I want to give little Lindsey a hug and squeeze you, because that is so scary. It's so scary to do that. Oh my gosh. Also when your voice cracks, that's so cute. I love it. Listen, asking for more money in any situation or just any money is anxiety producing. Like, it's just a weird situation. But I heard this just even today. I mean, these are regular conversations I'm having. A good negotiation is 90% settled before you go to the table. Like, you come prepared. You know what you're asking for. You've already done your research. You've gone to the depths to figure out what it is you want, and you're confident you can get it. And you know what they're going to say yes to and what they're going to say no to. So it's really important for people to start doing research. And I'm not talking about research on the internet. When you can, you have a conversation with people about money, a real conversation with your peers, with your colleagues, with anybody you trust, and really understand brass tacks. How much does this job pay? What has your career history been like? What has your salary history been like? How have you successfully asked for what you deserved? Get that information and come prepared. That way, the little bit of negotiation you really have to do is only 10% of the total conversation. I think I was also influenced by a wonderful woman by the name of Ching Valdezco, who told me it's really important to go out into the market and test your worth, even if you have a job. So if you're working, never feel bad about interviewing and getting an offer from somewhere else. You can always turn it down, because you know what? Your company would fire you in a heartbeat if they could replace you with a chatbot or an algorithm. You need to know your worth at any given time. Always be interviewing, always be testing the market. And that's advice that never goes out of style. So even if you're not looking, but someone invites you in for an informational interview, go for it. You don't have to say yes to the offer, but try to get some information in the process. I don't know, Lindsey, what else do you have?
I think that, it sort of combines everything we've talked about, right? Which is you have to be prepared. And I think the pre-mortem, I didn't use that word, but I love it, which is You should never walk into that room without knowing that what you're asking for is possible, what your alternatives are. There is so much information. And it goes back to what we said. This is why you have a network. You
That's
can
right.
look on salary.com, but that's not going to give you the answer that you want. And one thing we haven't talked about is college career centers. And I know we are doing an event with St. Louis because you went to college in St. Louis. So I want to throw that in here for the St. Louis folks in the crowd. But I think one of the most underutilized resources on the planet is university career centers, which you can go to if you graduated 50 years ago. You can go if you live in the local community near a college. And they have reams of real life information about salary negotiation. They will mock interview with you. They are such great resources, and you are just never alone. The idea that I remember sitting and wondering in my head what the salary should be is probably the biggest mistake you can make. So tap every resource that you have.
I love that. As you were talking, I was thinking about one of my favorite things that I wrote about in the book, and that's how sometimes money isn't money. Money can be other things. And you touched on that. But, in my life as an entrepreneur and even working in human resources, there were things I wanted that I knew I couldn't get, but I asked for other things. And I think, more and more people are working in non-traditional jobs, right? They're working as consultants or creative freelancers. And while money is super important, maybe there are other things you can ask for, whether it's opportunity or time or extra bonuses or access. Like, we're not creative enough when we negotiate our compensation. And I think that's been a real interesting and, quite frankly, lovely thing that I've discovered in my own career. You can't pay me a speaking fee, but can you fly me first class? I say yes to that, early in my career, because that was really fun. Or, can I bring a friend? Can I bring a girlfriend? And can we stay the weekend in Las Vegas? There are all different kinds of ways that you can just parcel out what's important to you and ask. All they can do is say no.
It strikes me you and I are immersed in this stuff, right? This is what we think about all day long and we talk about, and there's still so much we don't know. Can you talk a little bit about sort of figuring out what you don't know, right? How would you know that you can negotiate for that? How would you know that that's even on the table, whether it's community or what we call whisper networks? What's your advice for somebody who's sort of saying, well, I don't know any of this stuff. Where do I even start?
Well, you start at your local bookstore reading books from Lindsey Pollak and Laurie Ruettimann. I think that's a good.
I'm opposite of where I thought I was. Okay,
I think you're right. When I started out as an entrepreneur, and I write about this in the book, I had no idea what I was doing. I'm like, oh, I can't just keep my receipts in a shoebox. Nobody told me this. They didn't teach me this in college. And it turns out that the best way to learn sometimes is by trial and error, right? I mean, you screw up, you fail. But the idea that you can go slow and get some distance between your impulse and your action is really important. And then if you have questions, to be humble enough to go to that network and to ask. And believe me, Lindsey, you and I have talked about a million different things, in this crazy world that we're in. You have to ask the question in order to know how somebody does it, how they solve a problem. So find some trusted people in your life, 3 or 4 people, and don't be ashamed because they started somewhere too. So, yeah.
I think Rachel Hollis, the author, says she went to the University of Google. Anytime she has a question, somebody has made a YouTube video about it. Someone has answered that question, and there's just so many resources. Laurie, we've talked so much about job hunting and people in career positions. We haven't talked a lot about the leaders. So for people who are watching who are running a business or running a team, what's your advice to leaders on kind of how to stay the course and lead people in these very difficult times? I think it's a very different kind of conversation.
Yeah, I love that you asked that question because I think leaders forget that they're employees too. And they want to be there for their workforce. They want to be seen as these, parental figures, right? A source of strength, a source of comfort, but they often forget that they need that themselves. And so the principles in this book around well-being, continuous learning, risk management, self-leadership, really knowing your boundaries are important for leaders as well. I think workers make this assumption that leaders also have all the answers. And so I think leaders need to teach that they don't, that they're there to clear a path and to enable other people, but they're not necessarily fonts of wisdom or oracles. So being a little bit vulnerable, sharing what's going on in your life, talking about your own weaknesses and the chaos in your own home, all of that to connect on a human-to-human level with your workforce is going to pay dividends now in COVID, but also with retention strategies when the economy kicks back and we're in this great talent swap where everybody's looking. people are going to remember that you are a great boss with a big heart. So lean into compassion and empathy.
Lean into compassion and empathy. I love it. I am so excited to hear what other people want to ask you. The book is Betting on You. Laurie, last question from me. What are some final thoughts to leave everybody with? You know, I hate when people ask me to sum up a book in one sentence or one tweet length piece of advice. My takeaway is fix yourself first. But what is sort of the key message of your book that you would leave with everybody?
Yeah, I hope people do realize that you fix work by fixing yourself first. So thank you for saying that. But I also want people to realize that your work is not your worth. You were born and you deserve all the goodness just because you were born. You deserve love, affection, warmth, and education, good health care, to work at the intersection of purpose, passion, and meaning. You deserve it. And there are things that the business world can do for you to improve the world of work. But when they fail, don't let that get in your way. You can fix these things that are broken in your life by working on yourself. That's what I believe.
Beautiful. And I know you live that truth. So Shane, I'll pass it back to you. Such a pleasure to be here, Laurie. Thank you. So much fun to talk.
Thank you for this incredible conversation. I want to start with one of my questions. Audience, if you have questions, right now is the time to ask them. But I have a question that I think applies to possibly both of you. So a lot of, and I know from reading your book, Laurie, that your book applies to both people in blue collar and white collar jobs.
Sure.
And I have a lot of friends that, regardless of whether or not they liked being in the service industry, have found themselves out of work due to the pandemic. Yeah. That are looking for new career changes that, no matter how long they've worked in whatever field they are, aren't able to use those connections that they have. So they're starting off at like a blank slate. And I'm wondering if you have advice for someone that is working on getting out of the service industry right now and working on upward momentum.
Yes. So first of all, nobody is ever as alone as they think they are. Shane, because they know you and you know me and you know Lindsey, we are now part of a global network and we will be helpful. We will always be helpful. I think that's really the beauty of what we're seeing. There's a lot of downside to this digital way that we live. But if you are just 1 degree separated from someone, you are never alone. And so I would encourage your friends to reach out to me, to reach out to Lindsey. We will absolutely be helpful. But this is a feeling that people have right now. They've been furloughed and laid off and they feel helpless, like they can't start over, especially because starting over may mean a step back or going back to school, taking on more debt, or even they just can't afford it and they make more from unemployment than from going and taking another job. These are serious systemic challenges that we're having right now. So I think, there's no blanket answer for your friends in the service industry, except to tell them they're not alone and to please connect with me. I'm more than happy to do what I can to make introductions, to introduce them to opportunities for additional training in whatever field they're looking for, to connect them with mentors. But this idea that we're starting from ground zero and we're alone, I don't accept it. And especially Shane, since we're buddies now and you let me say ass bag, they're part of my network.
Great.
Lindsey?
Yeah, Lindsey.
Yeah. So the book that I wrote that's coming out in March is called Recalculating. And when the pandemic hit, I had this image in my head of exactly what you're picturing, which is when you're driving your car and you go down the wrong path and your GPS says recalculating. And I just imagined us all in that situation. And I went deep into this metaphor. And one of the things I thought about is when your car says recalculating, it doesn't take you back to where you started. It takes you from where you are and finds another path. And so to people that you're talking about in the service industry or in entertainment or in any field where there are no opportunities, there's actually been a tremendous amount of research on what they call changing lanes, which is that if you have been in the service industry, you might be 75% of the way to a job in HR or in marketing. You just have to find those crossover skills. And believe it or not, I spent a fair amount of time Googling things like easiest career change from waitressing, easiest career change from kindergarten teacher. And there are so many research points or data points on how to do that. Everyone might not be important to you, but for example, there was a chef who got really tired of working in the industry. And of course, there were no jobs in food service, but he had a tremendous amount of experience with logistics because he had ordered all of the ingredients and the materials and so on. And he really loved that part of it. And he was able to make that transition with, I think, taking 1 or 2 classes as opposed to investing an entire degree. So I think once you sort of shift your mindset that, as Laurie said, you're not starting over, you are just pivoting, it really opens up a whole new world of opportunities. But I do want to say something that I think you touched on too, Laurie. It doesn't mean you can't be sad. And it doesn't mean that you can't miss it and wish this weren't true. And that's how I felt about the job I got laid off from. I had to mourn it a bit and say, wow, this is not what I want. I'm going to find something different. But it's also okay to feel sad. And I just want to sort of give people the permission to do that, especially if you're transitioning out of something you really enjoyed.
Yeah, that's lovely, Lindsey. That's good. Yeah.
Thank you. Those are great answers. Sophia is asking, any advice for knowing your worth as a freelancer who doesn't operate in the traditional corporate space?
Wow. Yes. I think actually it might sometimes be, and this is counterintuitive to say, a little bit easier to know your worth in the freelance space because you can create a network where people are less encumbered by fear. In corporate America, most people do not want to talk about how much they make and how much they're worth because they're worried about what HR will think if they find out. They're worried about what their boss will say, or they're even worried because they've heard in some fake employee handbook that they're not allowed to talk about money. And when you're a freelancer, if you are doing it and doing it well, you're connected with a bevy of people who you're surrounded by. Now, I'm not saying it isn't competitive, but Lindsey and I have talked extensively about creating a network, of joining associations, of joining guilds, really leaning into all of these other networks that can provide you with information to know your worth. But I just have to say something really important. Nobody can define your worth except you. And your worth really has nothing to do with your work. So yes, there is a dollar amount associated with what you produce when you solve a problem on behalf of a client, but that's not your worth. That's just a good exchange of goods and services for money. Your worth comes in how you treat other people, what you contribute to society all the time, and the relationships you have and the people you're around. So I want to make sure that we really do our part to deconstruct work and worth. That's so important to me. And I know I'm like battering on about it, but it's my thing.
It's a good thing to go into. I did want to share something that is funny, but also kind of change my perspective. And I think women in particular tend to undervalue ourselves. I once spoke at a conference, and I shared this pretty publicly, where the head of the conference came up and said, "Lindsey, we are so glad to have you here. You were the best speaker and the cheapest." I was like, never want to hear that phrase again. And so I thought, I really need to do some research here. And people like Laurie and others who are very open about these numbers are very valuable. And I think we have a tendency, again, to charge the least amount. And I had someone totally shift my thinking. And it was somebody who said, when you're making your prices up, say the highest number you can without laughing out loud. And I thought, whether that's true or not, it just shifted my thinking that A, you can have fun with this. B, there is no perfect number that you are trying to get to mathematically that is the correct price. And that you have to be a little bit bold. And I think that just was kind of a mind shift that really changed things for me. I'm not sure I've totally implemented it, but it was a change from being the best and the cheapest. I
love that advice. You know, when I was starting out, someone told me that if you win 50% of the time at that price, it's too low.
Yeah, so I've heard if people aren't saying no, you're charging too little. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. So if you're not hearing no 50% of the time, it's like, you could do a little bit of work with your pricing. So part of being an entrepreneur, a creative professional, a freelancer, is the game that you play around pricing. I mean, it should kind of excite you. And if it doesn't, you need to explore that, because that's always going to be part of the challenge when you're your own boss and you own your own company.
I was going to say that very much plays into the mentor kind of aspect of it as well. Like having mentors in the field kind of help you to find out what their kind of values are and what kind of price range are good in your area, like your specific location as well. So yeah.
Absolutely, Shane. You got the hang of this.
Your book taught me a lot.
Shane's going to ask for a promotion and a raise, and we're going to get in trouble.
The next question is about mentors. So Maddie is asking, how would you find a mentor if you are trying to make a career change into a new industry? how do you break into the new industry where you have no existing connections?
Lindsey, you go first. You've got a good answer for this.
I think we should fundamentally change the idea of mentoring. I think we have this very outdated idea that you have to find a Yoda who knows everything about your industry and can guide you down the path. And I don't think that's realistic anymore. It worked when my grandfather worked at the same company for 50 years and could find someone up the chain.
Yeah.
I don't think that's true anymore. There are two ideas that I want to share with this person to think about. One is what's called micro mentoring, which is the idea that you can get lots of little mentoring bits and pieces from a variety of places. Laurie, you talked about Susie Welch. I think she was a mentor to you and you never met her.
Yes.
Because you followed her on Twitter, you read her books, you listened to her speeches. I hope that you and I are mentoring people right now with little bits of wisdom.
Yep.
The other piece is somebody doesn't have to be in your exact industry to be a mentor, right? They could have been through a career change. They could have other ideas. There's so many ways to get mentoring. And the third piece, I think, goes back to what we've already talked about, which is be bold. Right? Reach out to 10 people on LinkedIn who have the job you want, and maybe one of them will say yes, and that person will become a bit of a mentor. But I'm not a fan of this sort of idea that there's some person out there who can guide you through the wilderness. I think you have to think of it as lots of little pieces of mentoring. Laurie, what do you think?
That's so wise. I want Baby Yoda as my mentor. That's my preference.
I mean, that if you can get Baby Yoda, that works. But
So
Yoda,
much
Yoda,
cuter, so much cuter. We do find ourselves on this quest for mentorship, and I believe it is one of the ultimate hacks at work to enjoy work, to be more productive, to figure out where you're going. But this idea that you have to have a mentor is also a little interesting because sometimes we look for a mentor when we don't have enough confidence in ourselves. So I would ask that individual to explore the question, do you really need a mentor? Or do you have some insight into where you're going and you're just a little nervous? Could you use something like the pre-mortem in the book to test out some of your ideas and answer your own questions? Because I'll tell you what, when you go to a mentor and you're like, tell me the way I want to know, they're going to put that back on you anyway. You're going to have to answer your own questions. So take a stab at that first. And from there, put together that aspirational list of people that you admire and start to reach out with specific questions and see where that goes. And try Baby Yoda. I love Baby Yoda so much.
It can't hurt. I mean, little Baby Yoda can't hurt.
So I have another question, but audience, if you have more questions, be sure to put them in there. We have a lot of people watching, so I'm certain that you have questions and nothing is out of bounds. Well,
no. Clearly.
Some things are out of bounds, but
I'm just going to keep holding up the book.
Have either of you had any experience with breaking up with a mentor? So I know that there are maybe circumstances where like you've been fired and now your mentor is someone that you do not feel comfortable with because that was someone that you like worked with. So have you had any experiences with having to break up with a mentor and how that can affect you and your kind of path?
Really good question. I haven't broken up with a mentor, but I have broken up with people who I once admired and have moved on, or they've said something to offend me. They've changed my perspective, and it can be very awkward. And one would fear that it could be career limiting, but I have to tell you, it's not. Ultimately, while work feels like a family, it's not a family. It's a professional relationship. It can be close for a period of time. When you leave, it can continue on in a real way. But while you're employed, you are there to solve problems and to do good work on behalf of an organization. So if you feel that a relationship has gone one way that's not appropriate or doesn't serve you any longer, you have that right and that ability to change the terms of how you connect with someone. And have I had to do that? Absolutely. I mean, we live in a world right now that's polarized, that can be a little toxic, a little strange. People say things that I find that are just inconsistent with my values. I don't want that anymore in my life. And I always retain the right to end it and end it professionally and then to move on. So I think just understanding that you have more control than you think you have is probably a good way to look at that. But I don't know, Lindsey, have you broken up with anybody as a mentor?
I wouldn't say as a mentor, but very similar, just professional relationships or colleagues or bosses, and even quitting a job in some ways is a breakup. So just two thoughts that came to mind is, and I've done it in icky ways that I regretted, and I've done it in better ways. And I think the difference with the better ways is I felt that I was acting in integrity in the way I did it. And there are two things that I think come to mind. One is gratitude, right? That even if they no longer serve you, you are still expressing gratitude for what they have given you.
Yeah.
Even if they say, why don't you want to work together anymore? I'm so grateful for what you've done for me. I'm so thankful for the work. So I think number one is expressing gratitude. Number two is you don't have to be mean about it or tell them what you don't like about them or express it. And same with quitting a job. And I know you talk a lot about that in the book. I've always been taught, and I've really relied on it in any situation where I have to go away from something, which is not focusing on why I'm breaking up with you or why this isn't working, but what I'm going toward.
Yeah.
Right. So you've been so helpful, but I have found Shane, and Shane is being really helpful for me. I'm going in this direction. I'm going to lean more into that, but I'm so grateful for what you've done. I think that doesn't sort of put any sort of distress on the person, but sort of shows the direction that you're going. So I think as long as you feel you've acted with integrity, you can feel good about it. The person might not react how you want. There's nothing you can do. You can't control that, but you can feel good about the way you handled it.
Really well said. I had a professor at Webster by the name of Chris Parr, who taught me that when presenting an idea, you want to be brief, you want to be a little witty, and then you want to be seated. And that advice has served me well in so many different parallel opportunities in this world, whether it's saying goodbye to an organization, saying goodbye to a boss, presenting an idea that may be a little challenging. Be brief, be witty, and then be seated. Don't explain yourself any more than you have to. Just get up, say what you need to say, and sit down. I love a person who's brief. So I wanted to share that. And I wanted to say hi to Chris Parr and everybody else at Webster University who's watching.
One last question. So Leonard is asking, what jumps to your mind as having changed the most with work and putting yourself first during these COVID times?
Oh my goodness. Well, Lindsey, where can we go with that? You want to go first?
Oh man, that was such a fake. That was such a, I'm going to give myself more time to think and put you on the spot.
Well, I want to talk about my book, but I don't want to be so obnoxious about it.
I want you to finish. Okay. So I'm going to go in one direction and you might go in another, which is, I think the humanity that has come through is extraordinary. The depth of conversations that I have had with people where we have never gone below the surface has been amazing. And the honesty and the authenticity and just, again, the humanity has been incredible. And I hope that lasts. My friend Erica Keswin, who wrote a book that just came out called Rituals Roadmap and Bring Your Human to Work, she says she's now asking people, how are you? How are you really? And I think we never used to do that. So to me, the level of depth that we can get to with people we know through work, and not that you have to go deep all the time, but that's something that I will take as something that I want to carry forward.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about boundary setting, because when I wrote this book and I wrote a chapter around boundary setting and being a slacker and really setting boundaries, I wrote it pre-COVID. And I told people that the best employees in this world don't work 80 hours a week and complain about it. They work 32 hours and they take that extra time that they have and they do other things like invest in their well-being or learn. And now we're in an age of COVID where people feel like they have to continuously work. But what I'm seeing that's really interesting after a year is that people are embracing this idea, not necessarily of being a slacker, but of implementing boundaries. Enough is enough. Women are opting out of the workforce. People are burned out. Parents are exhausted. And more, I'm hearing this conversation. I can't do that. It's impossible. I cannot possibly have a meeting at this time, or, I'm burned out. I don't have time to think about this. Can we please get back to what we're talking about now? People are finally starting to implement boundaries for really crazy reasons, COVID, exhaustion, homeschooling, but they're doing it. And I think if we can build on that and learn that we have the capacity to say no, that opens up all kinds of opportunities for creative problem solving, getting the job done right the first time, trusting people to make a decision on their own and not requiring all these big collaborative meetings where everybody has an opinion. If we can just focus on getting the job done and getting it well, I think something good will have come out of COVID. That's what I think.
My kind of spin-off answer is that I just wish that the world, we are in a constant state of emergency. Yes. Responding to an email is rarely going to be an emergency. If everyone kind of just stopped apologizing for a delayed email. I'm very guilty of this, but stopped saying I'm sorry for my delayed email. Like, it would make everyone feel so much better if we just said, I'm doing the work. Like, this is the pace that I can work at. This is what I'm doing. I'm getting things done. And how can we make things done faster, better together? Like, because it's not an emergency. Like, we're living in a world that is kind of crumbling. And the more that we can take care of each other, our coworkers, our mentors, our friends, our acquaintances, like, the better that this world can be. So.
Shane, what? Your email isn't an emergency? I'm shocked to hear that. Come on now. Your coworkers asking questions, that doesn't take a priority in your life? Come on. I'm glad you've got a great perspective on this. And I know the people at Left Bank Books really believe in good work-life balance. It's a great store. I'm really honored that we were here tonight to talk to you, Shane, and, you know, hopefully sell a few books through Left Bank Books.
Absolutely. I did put the link up, so both books are available for sale. Lindsey's book is available for pre-order. Laurie's book is available for sale right now. You could get it in your hands tomorrow if you are local and want to come by and pick it up, or we can mail it anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. So if you have a friend in Canada that you think will really get a lot out of this book, we can send it to Canada.
Even Canada.
Shane,
even as far away as Canada.
Let me ask you a bookstore question before we go. Are you open for business? Are you curbside? How can people come into Left Bank Books?
We are doing curbside, so we have a lot of lists on our website about things to recommend, but we are not open to browsing. So we've had a couple of COVID situations.
You don't need to browse because you already know that Betting on You is the book that you want to buy. So no need to browse. Buy this book. It's so good. It's so good.
Thank you, Shane.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here tonight, audience. We will see you next time. Thank you for joining us for this incredible conversation. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. And Laurie and Lindsey, thank you so much for doing this. Really a pleasure.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.